take your seat. Now, Mr. Burling, please stand. Before you give evidence today, you must take an oath or an affirmation. Which do you choose to take?
I prefer the oath, thank you.
Thank you. Please take the Bible in your right hand and read out aloud the oath.
I, Derek Burling, swear by Almighty God that the evidence I shall give to this Commission shall be the truth, the whole truth and nothing but the truth.
Thank you, Mr. Burling. Please put the Bible back, take your seat, make yourself comfortable, and yes, we will commence.
Thank you.
Here's Mr. Shaw.
Could I have on the screen, please, Mr. Burling's witness statement, CRW 9980, there it is. Mr. Burling, can you see that on your screen?
Yes, I can.
Could you please, if operator, we can go to the penultimate page, please. Whilst your signature's redacted there, do you recognise that as your witness statement?
Yes, I do.
And to the best of your knowledge, information and belief, the matters stated in it are true and correct?
Yes, they are.
Commissioner, I attended the statement.
The statement of Mr. Burling being CRW.998.002.0786 will be an exhibit in the Commission.
Thank you, Commissioner.
Thank you, Mr. Shaw. Yes, Ms. Nelson.
Thank you, Commissioner. Mr. Burling, just looking at your statement at page 1, paragraph 5, you mentioned that from the commencement of your employment in 2010, you were involved in investigations that focused on breaches of policy and procedure and misconduct by Crown staff. Is that an accurate summary of what you were involved in when you first started working at Crown?
Primarily, yes.
And you broadly classify those investigations as human resources type investigations, would you?
Not in all cases, but that would be included in that. That's correct.
So those that weren't human resources related, did they have a criminal element?
If it involved maybe some contractors, for example, there may be some criminality there where I would be involved with dealing with the contractors, and obviously if criminality was identified, then the matters would be potentially referred to police.
And those matters involving criminality, the person of interest would be either a Crown employee or a Crown contractor?
It could also be a patron as well, absolutely.
So that's from the commencement of your employment in 2010, was that the case in relation to patrons as well?
Probably not as much as it is now, but yes.
Thank you. Now, arising from those investigations that focused on the conduct of Crown employees, was it your role to then issue written warnings to those staff?
My personal role, no.
Whose role was that?
That would be from the Human Resources Department.
So arising from those investigations into Crown employees, would you write a report to inform the Human Resources area of Crown?
If the matter was involving a staff member and Human Resources were involved, they would be involved in the interview, which I would conduct. They would go through their process, which is making notes, and from there an outcome would be determined, and if a warning was issued or even termination, then that would be in collaboration in a discussion and the relevant letter sent to the employee advising that outcome.
Did you personally have to do any written report of your investigation or your involvement at all?
In relation to human resources matters?
Yes. No. Okay. Were you involved in an internal investigation known as Operation Shawshank?
Name doesn't ring a bell to me, no.
Okay, turning back to your statement, as I understand it, you expanded into investigating activities of patrons focused on criminal behaviour that was unconnected to gaming activities. So we're talking about assaults, theft of Crown property, that type of thing. Is that correct?
Yes, absolutely.
And you still do that type of work today?
Correct.
And from 2018, you've managed the corporate investigations team.
Yes, towards the end of 2018, that's correct.
We'll go to page 2 of the statement, paragraph 16, thank you. You've articulated in paragraph 16 who is in that team. So it seems to include security investigations officers as well as surveillance investigation officers.
Yes, there's 2 security investigations compliance officers and 1 surveillance investigations and compliance officer.
And then 1 surveillance investigations analyst.
That's correct.
So when you say that you manage that team, do those persons report to you?
They do, yes.
And does that team manage all the investigations done by the surveillance and security areas?
I would suggest yes. I'm just trying to think of any areas where we may not be involved, but I can't think of any offhand.
And so would that be the team that currently undertakes those human resources type investigations that you've mentioned you were involved in from 2010?
Okay. Over time, the security department has taken on a security operations role manager who now does more of the HR matters than I would do. Probably up until 2019, I was still doing a lot of those matters, and even some for surveillance as well, and for gaming and for food and beverage from a number of departments around Crown.
I see. So any investigation that you're involved in at Crown currently, is that undertaken by you and this team that you've called the CIT?
Yes, depending on the nature. Some departments may do their own investigation. Gaming may investigate some matters that they have that I may not be involved with.
But just talking about
Sure.
matters that you are personally involved in investigating,
Yep.
all those matters, do you involve your CIT team?
Yes, they would be aware of it for sure. Absolutely.
Are there any other persons who are in the surveillance department or the security department who report to you other than those that you've mentioned at paragraph 16?
No.
You report to Mr. Brian Lee.
That's correct.
Do you report directly to any other person in the Crown Group?
No, I don't.
Could go to your statement at page 3, paragraph 18, thank you. In particular, subparagraph 18b, where you talk about the role of that team, the CIT team. You've mentioned that the role of the team includes, but is not limited to, subsection B, internal and external stakeholder relationships. Can you explain who the external stakeholder persons you're referring to in that paragraph would be?
I have a number of external stakeholders that I deal with. That would be the West Australian Police, the Australian Federal Police. I have relationships with the ATO, the Tax Office, ASIC, ACIC.
In the WA Police, do you liaise with a particular person or unit?
I have done, and I do, yes.
So you have a particular contact.
I have a number of contacts within West Australian Police, yes.
Thank you. Looking at subparagraph 18E, and you refer to the role of the CI team, including referring matters of concern in gaming behaviour to the responsible gaming RG team. How would those matters come to notice of your CIT team?
Part of the responsibility of the security investigation compliance officers is to review footage that they would look at as a result of reviewing the daily shift report, which is also known as the security and surveillance incident report. They might identify something off there, in which case they would refer that through to the RG team. The surveillance investigators, similarly, if they identified something in the course of their investigation, they would also do the same.
Thank you. Looking at paragraph section 18F, you refer to the role of your team, including active participation in the Persons of Interest POI subcommittee. Can you explain what you mean by active participation?
There is a Persons of Interest subcommittee which meets fortnightly, which I am a member, and we discuss persons of interest that have been raised during the course of the preceding fortnight.
And do you provide information, or does your CIT team provide information on those persons to the subcommittee?
Yes.
In a written report or an oral report?
Orally.
And apart from providing information of that nature and actually sitting on the subcommittee yourself, is there any other role, any other participatory role that the CI team has in that subcommittee?
The CIT would conduct background checks.
And that would be under the direction of the subcommittee or under the direction of you?
For my team, that would be under my direction. It would be a request from the committee.
And what is the extent of the background checks that your team would do for the subcommittee?
They would use our internal iTrack system, our gaming records, maybe hotel, computer records, Google searches, Facebook searches. There's a number of things that we can do there.
So there'd be open source material as well as internal Crown records.
Correct.
Is that, would there be any other information sources?
There'd be discussions potentially with LEAs, absolutely.
With law enforcement?
That's correct.
And who would undertake those discussions? Would members of your team, or would you do that?
Primarily myself.
Did you or your team put together patron information sheets in July 2019 addressing patrons from the Chinatown junket?
No, I'm sorry, I don't know anything about that.
Just want to ask you some questions about iTrack now. If we could have paragraph 8A of the witness's statement, please. You're talking about your direct reports in your role as compliance manager for the security department, And at subparagraph 8A, you say that one internal secondee, a security supervisor, had a role which included the administration of the incident management system known as iTrack. Is it the position then that since 2010 that either you or one of your direct reports has had responsibility for administering that system?
Yes.
So a good part of 10 years then?
From a security perspective at that time.
And when you say from a security perspective, what does that mean?
It didn't involve surveillance. From 2010, when I first started, it was a secondee, and that person was involved in the initiation of iTrack, which I believe came online around 2009, just prior to my commencement with Burswood or Crown. And that was security all the way through till I became involved with surveillance.
And when did you become involved with surveillance?
That would be around 2018.
So is it correct to say that since 2018, you or one of your team, whether they're in security or surveillance, have had management of the iTrack system?
The surveillance investigation and compliance officer would administer the iTrack as well as myself, correct?
And the surveillance investigation compliance officer is a member of your CIT team, aren't they?
Correct.
Mr. Burling, your voice is very quiet.
Sorry.
Could you please speak up?
So would you say the management of the iTrack system is ultimately your responsibility and has been since 2018?
No.
Whose responsibility would you say the management of the system is?
IT have a responsibility and a role there as well. So the overall responsibility would be through the IT department.
I see. If we're talking about the management of the data in the iTrack system,
Yes.
would you agree that since 2018 that has been your responsibility with your team?
Yes.
And that's whether it's from a security perspective or a surveillance perspective since 2018?
Correct.
Do you have full access to iTrack?
Yes, I do.
And how long have you had that?
Since 2018.
We'll go back to your statement CAW 998 002 0786 at paragraph 32. Thank you. This paragraph goes over into the next page, and as you can see from the first line, you're detailing the large number of reports that you receive as part of your role. So starting at subparagraph 32A, we talk about the daily shift report or the security and surveillance shift incident report. Does that include all suspicious or unusual patron behaviour or gaming activity that would be of interest to the AML team?
No.
So what report would that type of activity go into if it doesn't go into this daily shift report?
I'm unaware if there's a separate report for AML. This report primarily is in relation to incidents that have occurred of a security nature, which would include stealing matters, damage, assaults, would include breaches of NRLs, breaches of the Section 26(2) of the CCA, any matter in relation to AML is available within the iTrack system.
And who else gets the daily shift report?
There's too numerous for me to mention. The list is quite comprehensive. It does go to the executive and to a number of different departments and managers within those departments.
And by the executive, do you mean the CEO?
I'm not sure currently. I'm sure at one stage he was included. At this stage, I don't know who's actually on that list. It's called the DSR list, basically.
Does the AML team have access to this report?
I'm sure they do.
And well, how do you use the report when you receive it?
My team, CIT in security, not from the surveillance perspective, but primarily from the security side, would look through those incidents to ensure that they are compliant with our SOPs, to make sure the incident is correctly written off, that the appropriate actions have been taken, and if there's any training matters that may come out of that, if we've had an interaction or engagement with a patron, for example. It would also include looking at, in the media tab, the quotes for any damage, etc., etc.
And would you expect that all the incidents in that daily shift report would also appear on the iTrack system?
Absolutely.
As a notification?
Absolutely.
Looking at subparagraph 32B, thank you, which is a reference to what you call the daily DLG SCI report, and that's the Department of Local Government, Sports and Cultural Industries, correct?
Correct.
Have you had responsibility for setting the parameters that determine what information goes into that report from the iTrack system?
Do you mean initially, when it was set up?
Well, we'll start then. Initially, when it was
No.
set up? No. What about now? Do you have responsibility for those parameters?
I have looked at the parameters of the report about 2 years ago. It would be when I was looking at compliance for surveillance. I did a review in relation to some reports. This was one of them, and some refinements were made to that report.
Under your direction?
Under my direction, in consultation.
Who did you consult with?
I'm confident I would have consulted with my general manager.
And by your general manager, do you mean Mr. Lee?
Yes.
When you say you're confident, do you have an independent recollection of doing so?
No.
Who asked you to do the review in the first place?
No one that I recall.
So when you say, so you just undertook it from your own initiative?
Yes.
And when you say 2 years ago, would that be around July 2019?
I'm not sure on the date.
But in your estimation, it was about 2 years ago.
About that, yes.
And what prompted you to undertake that review?
I looked at a number of reports that were coming out of surveillance to the broader business, One in particular I recall, I have no recollection on the title of it, but it was going to a number of recipients within the business, and when I conducted a review of that report, the report was just being filed. It had no beneficial or benefit to anybody who was actually receiving it. I went through then a number of other reports to ascertain the similar sort of who was receiving what and what they were doing with the report. I came across this one and identified it's a deficiency, and in my review refined it to give the DLG SCI more information, and further to remove information that they did not require.
Did you consult with anyone from the DLG SCI in relation to what you were putting in or taking out of the report?
No.
How could you determine, therefore, that it was deficient from their point of view?
It was matters within the legislation. The report contains matters of gaming-related issues, as it says, with procedural errors and breaches of games rules. Also, the surveillance, people entering the control room, access there. It was giving the DLG SCI information in relation to criminal NRLs, in relation to damage matters or drug-related matters found in hotels, crash reports from cars where people may have been NRL'd as well, which were not part of their requirements.
So what information did you remove from the report when you did this review?
Those particular matters.
So the gaming-related errors?
No.
You kept those in?
No, the only matters that were removed was in relation to criminal matters of NRL breaches.
And to this day, are they still removed from the parameters of that report?
Correct. There was an inclusion that I put in there for the section 26.2 CCA, which included an attempt incident in relation to somebody attempting to breach that, which was not included. So it actually gave the DLG SCI further information.
Sorry, an incident of attempting to breach what in particular?
A section 26.2 CCA exclusion.
So the department now receives those
Correct.
matters, but the department doesn't receive criminal NRLs.
No.
Since doing the review and making those refinements to the report, you think a couple of years ago, have you spoken to anyone at the department about the report and the content of it?
No.
Has anyone from Crown spoken to you about the content of the report
No.
since that time?
No.
So as far as you're aware, the department has been happy with the report since you made the refinements?
I've had no feedback.
And apart from you feeling confident that you spoke to Mr. Lee about it, did you speak to anyone else within Crown about the refinements that you made to the report at the time you did it?
I requested one of my staff to change that parameter. Correct.
And did you tell anyone else within Crown at that time that you were instructing your staff member to do that, apart from Mr. Lee?
I don't know. It's possible.
Right, moving on to sub-paragraph 32C. Would it be correct to summarise that the surveillance daily shift report is predominantly a tool to manage the human resources capacity within the department?
No, not predominantly, no.
Does it contain information about incidents on iTrack?
Yes, it does.
And when you say the second sentence, again, information is taken from iTrack, what particular information are you referring to?
With the surveillance daily shift report, that would include the gaming-related matters, any access to the control room. It may include if somebody's taken a sick day. It would include the quantity of audits that the staff have done during the course of a shift. It would also include some reviews on some player activity.
When you say reviews on player activity, what type of reviews are you referring to?
With the operators watching and monitoring games, they would write down there if there has been a jackpot win, for example.
Is that also referred to as the hot player report? Or is that a separate report?
There is a hot player report, which I don't see, but it can refer to that in this shift report.
So when you are referring to reviews on player activity, for example, if there's been a jackpot, what are the surveillance operative or the person who's doing that review, what are they looking for? What type of information?
For a jackpot is confirmation of a jackpot.
And at the beginning of the answer that you gave as to what was in that report, you also referred to gaming-related matters. What do you mean by that phrase?
Breach of rules, if there's been a breach of rule, if there's been a gaming procedural error.
Thank you. If we could have 32D. This talks about a monthly surveillance report summarising information taken from iTrack regarding breaches of rules and procedural errors. So is that just similar information to what you were just talking about? It's the gaming-related matters in the surveillance daily shift report?
Purely in relation to gaming-related matters, correct.
And what is done with this report?
It's provided to the DLG SCI from surveillance.
The previous report, which was at subparagraph 32C, the surveillance daily shift report, is that also provided to the DLG SCI?
Again, I'm trying to think who's on the
If you don't know, Mr. Burling, please say you don't know.
I'm unaware. I don't know.
How do you use the surveillance daily shift report?
I just review the activities of the surveillance department and then look at the matters that have been reported and look at some of the incidents in relation to what they have reported.
If we could look at subparagraph 32E, please. Monthly major and minor incident compliance reports. What type of matters would appear on this report?
This is conducted at the end of the beginning of the following month, which would include matters of serious criminal nature, which would be the major incidents. We may have a serious assault. The minor incidents may include something along the lines of a minor property theft.
And apart from you, do you know who gets that report?
That report is forwarded directly to me for review. As you can probably understand, there's needs to be reviewed to ensure the incidents that are in there relate to the compliance reporting, because it goes into the Cura monthly report.
So apart from putting those matters into the Cura monthly report, do you do anything else with them in your review?
With this particular report?
Yes.
No.
And 32G, thank you, operator. You've mentioned the Cura compliance report, which are reviewed by you on a monthly, quarterly, 6-monthly and annual basis. And you say those reports are used to inform monthly legal and compliance meetings, which you might attend. So what type of matters, apart from the major incidents that you mentioned in your previous answer, what other types of matters might go into a Cura report?
It's to ensure that staff are aware of their the opening hours legislatively around Boxing Day and Christmas Day and Easter. That the OH&S matters through that month have been addressed, that we are compliant with our accommodation levels within the hotels. There's legislative requirements surrounding emergency management plans. There's a number of legislative questions on that report, and the major and minor incident report is embodied into that Cura report.
Those matters that you've just described, so the opening hours and the OHS and the accommodation in the hotels, would they be matters that you would put in to your department's Cura compliance report? Or are you talking about matters that came from other departments?
No. The Cura report is a pre-populated form which has these questions in there which are to be answered. Have these regulations been met for the month of? Yes, no, not applicable.
And you're signing that for your department?
For security and for the surveillance, there's two separate Cura reports.
And do you sign both of those on behalf, one on behalf of surveillance, one on behalf of security?
Correct.
And would there be any matters in those reports that you sign that would inform the anti-money laundering framework that Crown has in place? Or any decisions around AML?
Not that I can recall.
Thank you, that can be taken down. And if we could have CRW 700-019-3320. You've mentioned in your statement receiving a quarterly fraud report. Does that report inform the agenda of the fraud risk management meetings?
Sorry, could you just repeat that question for me?
Putting what's on the screen to
Yep.
one side,
Oh, okay.
you in your paragraph 32, you'd also mentioned receiving a quarterly fraud report.
Yes. Yes.
Does that, what's in that report, inform what's discussed at the Fraud Risk Management Committee meetings?
Trends and analysis throughout the complex in relation to fraud, stealing matters.
So is that, yes, the matters that you see in the fraud report that you receive on a quarterly basis, are they then raised at the committee meetings for the Fraud Risk Management Committee?
The report is discussed at that committee meeting, that's correct, yes.
And you can see on the screen here is an example of a committee trends report for the Fraud Risk Management Committee from April 2016. And you're a member at that stage. You see your name at the bottom of the page.
Yes, that's correct.
And are you still a member of this committee?
Yes, I am.
If you could just scroll slowly through the document, thank you. You see here that there's a category called walkout. And it seems to be a list of patrons who have left the premises without paying for meals. Is that what that category is concerned with?
Yes, that's correct. Yep.
And then we could scroll through to the next page. And counterfeit, that's notes that are being presented by patrons that are suspected of being counterfeit.
Yes, that's correct.
And then we could scroll through to the next. Unauthorised entries. So that people going into areas of the complex where they're not permitted.
Yes, that's correct.
And go through to the final page, thank you. So probably the page before, sorry. And then there's a category of theft. So the page, thank you. And they seem to be concerned with low-level incidents of thieving on the property. Is that correct?
There's certainly a lot of criminal matters there. Look, all incidents to me are of concern.
Would you agree that the matters that are listed here, they tend to be concerned with thefts of property of low value, a bike, a backpack, a jacket?
Well, I don't know, Commissioner, whether he can deduce anything from looking at that. That's a bit unfair, really. Well, we can all guess at what might be there, but unless we know, you're really guessing.
I think that's a fair enough comment, Mr. Shaw. I think we can move on.
Thank you.
I know some people's bikes are very expensive.
Thank you, Commissioner. I take the point. Mr. Burling, this is from 2016, a similar categories of frauds discussed at current Fraud Risk Management Committee meetings.
Yes, they are.
Are there any additional categories that are discussed in 2021?
The format is slightly different. There is more commentary around some of the statistics. I don't think the categories have changed.
And does information in this report that goes to the committee meetings back then and now, was that information provided by your team?
It is now. It wasn't back in 2015, as we're looking here. That was provided by the surveillance head of surveillance, I believe, at that time.
And the matters that are before the committee now, are they matters that would be investigated by your team?
If they warranted investigation, yes.
Thank you, that can be taken down. Now, apart from the iTrack reports that we've discussed that were in your statement, we've also mentioned the hot player report, but you said you didn't receive that report. Is that correct?
That's correct.
Does anyone in your team get that report?
Not that I'm aware.
But you said, I think it was under the surveillance daily shift report, you would be informed as to jackpot wins or other significant wins to patrons or losses to the casino on a daily basis.
The daily shift report would record if there was a jackpot win. You say significant losses to the casino. I don't recall that being put in there. In that terminology, no.
Are you aware of a surveillance department standard operating procedure from the 25th of September 2018?
I'm aware there are surveillance operating procedures. I'd have to refresh my memory by reviewing the documents.
I'll show you that document. It's subject to a non-publication order, Commissioner. It's CRW 700 010 0002. If we could have the first page, thank you. Is that a document with which you're familiar?
I have seen this, yes.
And does this standard operating procedure from 2018, is that still current within the surveillance department?
I believe so.
And does it inform some of your team's work?
It's quite a thick document. I'd have to go through it.
Well, I'll take you to a particular page. If we could have 0112 or page 111 of the document. Thank you. You can see there's a standard operating procedure for a hot player review, or HPR.
Yes.
Are you familiar with that section of the SOP?
No, not familiar with it, no.
So your team's not responsible for doing these hot player reviews?
No.
But you're informed of the outcome through those daily reports. Is that correct?
Not of an outcome. The surveillance daily shift report comments. It ticks a box saying a hot player carried out from memory.
So what do you understand that to mean when you see that in a daily report that you receive? What do you understand that to have included?
That the surveillance operators and the management have conducted their compliance requirements, which is all I'm looking at.
Well, you mentioned that part of the surveillance daily shift report is a review on player activity.
It comments on that, that's correct.
And particularly after a jackpot win.
It informs on there if there is a jackpot win, that's correct.
And to your knowledge, if there is a jackpot win, is the patron who has won that jackpot, is their conduct reviewed looking at the surveillance tape?
I believe so. In every jackpot, I believe a review is conducted, yes.
And you would see the outcome of that review?
And not necessarily.
Who would see the outcome of that review?
I don't know.
Is that not a matter that would be in that daily shift report that you receive?
Not from my memory, no.
What do you understand? That can be taken down, thank you. When a review of a patron's jackpot win is undertaken, what do you understand that the Crown employees, the purpose of doing that review is?
To ensure, I'm speculating here, I'm not involved in that, to ensure that everything is fine. The jackpot.
How long have you been receiving those daily shift reports that might mention that such a review has been undertaken?
Since I became licensed in surveillance and took over the compliance in surveillance.
So is that 2018 or before 2018?
No, about 2018. I'm not sure on the month.
So since at least 2018 you've been receiving surveillance daily shift reports that would include a review of a patron's behaviour after or before their jackpot would win. Is that correct?
It would include in the daily shift report that a jackpot review has been conducted.
And have you ever made inquiries as to what that actually means?
No?
So you received that surveillance daily report that might have that entry in it, but you don't understand what it means.
I didn't say that.
Mr. Burling, what do you understand to be the purpose of a surveillance operative or a security operative doing a review of a patron's jackpot win?
They're reviewing that the jackpot win is correct. I don't know how else to...
Well, correct in what way?
That it's not unlawful.
And by looking at surveillance tape of the jackpot win, I presume they're looking at patron behaviour, is that correct?
I'm not sure.
Well, surveillance footage, we're talking about cameras in the roof of the gaming floor or the Pearl Room, aren't we?
Correct?
Which are observing activity, behaviour that's occurring underneath the camera.
Correct?
So if a surveillance operative or a security operative is looking at footage from a particular camera, would you agree that they're looking at conduct of patrons?
Absolutely.
And if they're reviewing footage for the purpose of looking at a jackpot win, are they reviewing the patron's behaviour before the jackpot win?
I would presume so, yes.
And what type of behaviour would they be looking for from the patron? What's the purpose of looking at that?
To see if there's anything unlawful that's in relation to winning the jackpot.
So to see if
That's
the patron has done anything unlawful?
Or if there's a breach of rules, maybe, or a procedure error to ensure that the jackpot is a lawful win.
And the outcome of that review would be in the daily shift report, or would it be in a
No.
separate document?
No, the outcome of that review would be on the ITRAC report. The daily shift report comments that a review has been done.
And would you be given access to that ITRAC report that is the outcome of the review?
Absolutely.
And you'd be given access to every report that's an outcome of a jackpot review?
It's on the ITRAC and I have access to that, that's correct.
Are you aware of a patron by the name of Daniel Petkov who came to the casino up until about February 2018?
I'm aware of the name, yes.
Are you aware of the fact that he was convicted of stealing from Westpac Bank?
Yes, I am.
When did you first become aware of the name Daniel Petkov?
I really don't know when.
If he had been charged by WA Police, would you have been made aware of that fact in your role?
Not necessarily.
If he'd won a significant jackpot in the Pearl Room suite on an electronic gaming machine, would that have come to your notice as a result of a review of that jackpot?
It would be on the ITRAC report.
Do you recall seeing a review ITRAC report for a significant jackpot win by Mr. Petkov?
No.
He won a jackpot at Crown Perth on the 8th of February 2018 of $27,075.40. Does that assist you in recalling whether you knew about that at the time?
No.
So you don't recall whether you saw that review of any surveillance footage?
No.
I'll show you that footage. It's PCRC 0019 0001 0001.
Sorry, what date is this?
This is the 8th of February 2018.
Thank you.
And it's at, the jackpot win was recorded at 10:02 p.m. You can see Mr. Petkov is sitting with, he's the closest to the screen, but in the top, the closest to us in the screen, but in the top sort of right, left hand side. He just reached across. He seems to be drinking at the moment. Can you see that person?
Yes, I can.
He puts his hand in his pocket, transfers something to his other hand, looks around. Reaches to the other machine and puts something in that machine he's sitting in front of. Puts his hand in his pocket and reaches to the other hand and puts something else in the machine. He reaches into his pocket again and changes hands and puts that into the machine. Do you know who that gentleman is that just walked in?
No, I don't. It's a very grainy picture from what I can see here.
Do you recognise that gentleman who's just walked in?
No, I don't.
And do you know what's happening at that point? We'll look at it again.
I have no idea. Sorry.
Play it one more time, thank you, operator. Have you seen that footage before?
No, I haven't.
Does it appear to you that Mr. Petkov is playing two machines at this point?
It's possible.
Is there anything else about his behaviour that causes you concern?
I really have no opinion on that.
And is it your evidence that you don't know what these two gentlemen and the other Crown employee are doing?
I have no idea.
In the first 3 seconds of that video, does it appear to you that Mr. Petkov is taking cash from his pocket and feeding it into the machine?
That could be the case. It's not very clear on that, but it's quite possible.
Were you ever tasked with giving Mr. Petkov a banning notice?
Not me personally.
Were you aware of Mr. Petkov being referred to any committee of Crown, such as the Person of Interest Committee, to be considered?
No, I don't.
If we could have document CRW 700 072 4439. And if we could have page 3 first, so we can see the date. This is an email chain, Mr. Burling.
It's also got the contact details for Crown employees, if they could just be redacted, please.
Thank you.
Ms Nelson, does it contain patron details?
It does towards the beginning of the email chain. Yes, if it could be redacted except in relation to Mr. Petkov's name.
So, Mr Burling, can I advise you for your benefit that there's a general prohibition on the publication of names of patrons in the Commission, except for those whose names are on the public record sort of outside of the Commission. and Mr. Petkoff is one of those because there's been publicity in relation to him. So there's no difficulty with referring to Mr. Petkoff's name. In relation to other patrons' names, it would be of assistance to us if you didn't, in fact, name other patrons unless we told you that it was all right to do so. Just refer to them as that patron or something of that nature.
Thank you, Commissioner.
Thank you, Commissioner. We could have page 3 down the bottom. It could be, page 4 could be redacted except for, thank you. We could have page 3 and page 4 up together, that would be very useful. Thank you. So you can see on the 27th of April 2018 at 4:45 p.m, you, along with 2 other Crown employees, receive an email from Carolyn Galati. Do you agree with that, Mr. Burton?
Yes, I do. Yes.
And is Carolyn Galati a member of the AML team at Crown Perth at that time?
I believe she was, yes, that's correct.
And she asks you, along with the other 2 employees, about an enhanced customer due diligence in relation to particular patrons.
Yes.
What did you understand she was asking of you?
For some background checks.
And then we can see over the next page that one of those patrons that she asks for is Daniel Petkov.
Yes, that's correct.
And is that number his patron number at Crown?
I
Don't know.
don't know.
And having received an email from Miss Galati of this nature, what task would you then perform?
It's quite possible I may have forwarded that to one of the members of my team to carry out those checks.
And would those checks be those tasks that you described earlier in your evidence?
Yes.
A Google search and looking at Crown's internal documents?
Yes, and potentially LEAs as well. I personally don't recall dealing with this matter.
Thank you, if that's a convenient time, Commissioner.
Yes. Mr. Burling, we will now have morning tea. We will resume again at 11:30. Thank you. Thank you. Please be seated. Yes, Ms Nelson.
Thank you, Commissioner. Mr Burling, we were talking about Mr Daniel Petkov just before the break, and you said you were unaware of when you first came to know of his name. Is that correct?
Yes.
Over the break, have you reflected on that? And do you have any other evidence about when you might have first come to know about Mr Petkov? Are you aware of the amount of money that he stole from Westpac?
I believe it was in the region of 3 million, maybe $3.5 million.
And are you aware of the amount of time that he stole that money? Over how many months?
No, not off the top of my head.
Did Crown ever task you or anyone else with doing an investigation into how Mr Petkov came to put that amount of money into the casino?
No,
You're not aware of any investigation done internally by Crown into Mr Petkov's behaviour and the risks that it posed to the organisation?
no, I'm not.
Would you agree that his behaviour, stealing that amount of money and then using it for gambling purposes predominantly, indicates a responsible services of gaming risk to Mr Petkov himself?
It's certainly unlawful, stealing the money, absolutely.
Or does it indicate to you that Mr Petkov might have had a gambling habit that needed some assistance?
Being aware of what I've been told now, that he certainly had a gambling issue.
When you say you've been told now, do you mean just during evidence today? That's
What I'm aware of now, yeah.
And when you say what you're aware of now, what have you just been told that's new to you about Mr Petkov's situation?
That he's gambled all the money through Crown. I wasn't totally aware of that.
He also went to Crown Melbourne. Were you aware of that?
I know very little about Mr Petkov.
In your statement, you refer to your title as being Security Investigations and Compliance Manager.
That's not what it is currently. That's what it was prior to around 2018.
Oh, I apologise. So that your title, you do say at paragraph 14, changed to Investigations and Compliance Manager.
That's correct.
2018, and that's your current title?
That's correct.
And in that role, would you have any role in conducting investigations into how Crown could be exposed to a risk of the extent of Mr Petkov's criminality?
If I was tasked with that, I would get involved, absolutely.
But you weren't tasked with that at all?
No.
And you don't know if anyone was?
No, I don't.
We could go to your statement, please, at paragraph 36, CRW 998 002 0786, at paragraph 36. It's page 8. Paragraph 36, you say, I'm aware that if any staff member sees any activity that looks unusual, they should lodge an unusual activity report, UAR, or report the matter to their manager or supervisor. How long have UAR reports been in place at Crown Perth?
Probably within the last 6 to 8 months. They're through the portal. There's an AML portal, and they're lodged through there.
And you say they should lodge a UAR. Is there any obligation on surveillance or security staff to make a UAR internal report?
It's a direction that we do.
So you'd classify that as an obligation?
Yeah.
To your knowledge, is there any sanction if a staff member does not lodge a UAR after
No.
observing suspicious activity or unusual activity?
No. Not that I'm aware.
And is it your understanding that a staff member has an option in effect to lodge a UAR through the portal or report it orally to their manager?
I think it's circumstance dependent. Perhaps a dealer, for example, may see something and advise the table games manager, who then may report that through the UAR portal. I believe that could occur.
And prior to 6 to 8 months ago, was there any direction to staff to report suspicious or unusual matters?
The SMRs were reported through to the AML team.
And how were they reported?
There was an SMR form which was filled in and emailed through to the AML team. That would have, I think the portal has been in existence for about 6 to 8 months. UARs would have been around, I'm just thinking now, clarifying, probably 12 to 18 months, and SMRs prior to that. Maybe a little bit out on the timings, but that's to the best of my knowledge.
Thank you. And if a staff member considers that an activity is suspicious enough to generate an unusual matter report, do they need the approval of their manager, their surveillance shift manager, to make such a report, or can they do it without seeking that approval?
I would believe they can just automatically do it. I don't think they need approval to do so.
And once a UAR report is made, I just want to understand the progress of that report through the Crown internal process. What is done with it, to your knowledge, once it's been made by a staff member?
It's then available directly to the AML team.
And do I understand from paragraph 37 onwards of your statement that once it makes its way to the AML team, that you may be asked by the AML team to conduct some extra investigation into the matter? Is that correct?
Yes, that's fair, yes.
But it's a matter of discretion whether the AML team asks you or your team to do that.
I get requests constantly from AML in relation to persons of interest that come up on UARs. My team conduct reviews of persons of interest from UARs. And my team also look at the ITRAC incidents in relation to UARs, which are assigned as an AML incident.
Thank you. You said in that answer that you get the request from the AML team. Does the request always come directly to you and you then pass it on to a team member?
No, that I probably apologise for that. It's to the CIT investigation group email.
But that's a group email, and how is the work then divided up amongst the team?
I have one of my security investigators looks at the AML side from the POI, look at the UAR from the POI side, and I have the surveillance analyst look at the CCTV footage, and they collaborate with the AML team.
And is your team also asked to look at any of the gaming records in Psycho for the particular patron?
They may do, yes.
Is there a standard operating procedure for how your team members undertake those UAR investigations tasked by the AML team?
No.
And once they've done the analysis, your team, do they produce a written report or an ITRAC notification report, or how's the information conveyed?
The outcome of the CCTV review is lodged on ITRAC. Dependent upon the information received through the security, the AML team would be advised maybe via email, or the information may be included, predominantly is as a supplemental report into that ITRAC incident.
Thank you. We could have a look at CRW 700 002 0132. This has a release date of to be confirmed, TBC, and it's the Security Department Standard Operating Procedure, AML CTF. Have you seen that document before?
Yes, I'm sure I have, yes.
We could just have a look at the next page so the witness can see both pages. Thank you. Just give you a minute to look through the second page. You see at page 2 at paragraph 4.1.2 that it says the Securities Investigations and Compliance Officer will ensure all staff are completing their training on time and follow up relevant employees. Now, who has that role at the moment?
That's Benjamin Mariotti.
And Mr. Mariotti reports to you?
Correct.
And what do you understand that the AML CTF training is at the moment? How is it delivered, firstly?
There is online AML training, and there is face-to-face training, which is carried out by the security training team and or the security trainers within the teams. I receive the reports from the training teams as to how many staff have completed that training and how many are required to, which I keep those reports.
The security trainers within the team that you referred to, where do they get their training from?
From the security training team. We have a training school.
And are you responsible for managing the training school?
No.
Do you have any responsibility for managing the training of AML CTF, or is that devolved down to Mr Mariotti?
No, Mr. Mariotti is not involved in the training. He just ensures that compliance to staff have completed it, which is part of his audit function.
And those security training persons within the team, is that their sole job, to train on AML CTF?
No.
And what other role do they perform?
Embodied within the security department, there are four teams. Within each shift in those teams, there is a trainer who can train the security staff on a number of functions. They have gone through specific training through our training school and have received a certificate 4 in TNA, training and assessment. They are then provided with the face-to-face AML training in relation to this particular matter, and will deliver that to some of our staff who have missed out with the scheduled training, as some of the staff are part-timers and cannot always be available.
Thank you. Just looking at page 3, going on to 4, at paragraph 7.1 and 7.2. Where it talks about unusual activity reporting. Just give you a minute to look at that.
Yes.
And is that what you understand to be the extent of the obligation on a security department employee in relation to unusual activity reporting?
Yes.
And would you agree that it's expressed there in terms more of an obligation? The employee will complete an unusual activity report?
Absolutely.
Is this standard operating procedure now being signed off and in operation?
Off the top of my head, I'm not sure. I believe so.
Is there any anti-corruption and bribery training offered at Crown, to your knowledge?
I don't believe it's a standalone training program.
But there is some training?
I'm not sure if it's part of the induction currently. I'm not sure.
You haven't received any such training?
Not that I recall.
If we could have that taken down and go back to Mr Burling's statement, CRW 998-002-0786, and at paragraph 31, which is page 7, sorry, page 6, page 5, the bottom of page 5. I've actually got that reference incorrect, but you might know this off the top of your head. In your statement, you referred to Crown Learn.
Yes, I may have done, yes.
Can you explain what that is?
Crown Learn is our online training webpage where staff enter into the portal there and carry out their online training in a number of areas of environmental services, AML for one, RG, RSA, hazard protection, submitting forms, different types of forms, occupational health and safety. There's numerous training.
So the Crown Learn platform is different to the training school you were referring to in your previous answer.
Yes.
Thank you. I just want to ask you now about the involvement of the security and the surveillance investigators in evaluating money laundering risks to Crown generally. So if a patron presents to the cage with, say, a large amount of cash to be exchanged for chips or even to be deposited into their account, their DAB account at Crown, is there any obligation on the patron to provide identification, to your knowledge?
Depending on the amount of cash, if it reaches the threshold transaction, absolutely.
And if it reached the threshold transaction, is a Crown Rewards card a sufficient identification? What type of identification should be produced?
Photo identification.
And has that always been the case in the 10 years you've been at Crown?
I believe so.
So if a surveillance footage showed that someone produced a Crown Rewards card as a form of identification and they presented at the cage with a large amount of cash, in your opinion, that would be a breach of procedure?
Depending on that value, if it reached the TTR,
If it was over $10,000?
I would suggest that should not have gone through.
And to your knowledge, that's always been the case in the amount of time you've been working at Crown in the investigations area?
I believe so.
And if someone presented at the cage with over $10,000 in cash, what is your understanding of the obligation on the cage employees in terms of reporting, or do they have no obligation?
No, they would submit a TTR, a report through to AML, advising that that transaction has gone through.
And in the normal course of events, would that be a matter that the AML team might contact you or your team through the CIT email to ask for more investigation?
It's possible.
And who would instruct an investigation to begin if the CIT email did receive such a request for AML from AML?
Who within CIT,
Well, yes.
do you mean?
Yeah.
I may do the investigation myself, or I may pass it to one of my investigators to conduct that investigation.
And as manager of that team, do you have any discretion to refuse to do an investigation that AML has requested?
Never refused to do investigations up till now. I would not think that that's
So if
part
you-
of my vocabulary to say no.
So if you received a request in the usual way through the CIT email from the AML team to look into a patron, then you would always do so.
Either myself or my team, for sure. Absolutely.
You see on the desk in front of you, there's a piece of paper, Mr. Burling, with some patron names on it and pseudonyms for those patron names.
Yes.
And looking at patron AE,
Yes.
Commissioner, do you have a copy of that?
I'm just wondering if I do. I don't know that I do.
Do you recall a patron by the name of patron AE?
I'm aware of the name, yes.
When did you become aware of that name?
A number of years ago now, a fair few years ago, I believe.
Were you involved in some internal investigation into the patron when you were at Crown?
No.
In what context did you become aware of his name a number of years ago?
I was aware that it was a matter that was being investigated, but it wasn't by myself.
Who did the investigation?
Not sure who was responsible for it.
Are you aware of whether anyone at Crown made contact with any law enforcement agency in relation to patron AE?
I don't know.
Now, back in 2017, would you have had responsibility for liaising with law enforcement about patrons?
Yes, I would.
And who else within the organisation back in 2017 would have had that responsibility as well?
Depending on the nature of the inquiry, I would say there could be a number of people within the organisation may contact LEAs. If I'm tasked with the request, I will carry that out. In this particular case, I was not involved in that.
In 2017, was Mr. Brian Lee your direct? Did you directly report to him?
Yes, I did.
And if he was involved in investigating this matter, would it be something that he would talk to you about?
Most likely. Most likely.
How long ago do you think this name came to notice? For
Um,
you?
I'm not sure. 5 or 6 years. I'm really guessing because I had no involvement in it. I was aware of it, but I had no involvement in it.
When you say you're aware of it, what aspects were you aware of? What was it that you're aware of?
That there was an investigation into patron AE.
What was being investigated about patron AE?
In relation to, I believe, quantity of money that was being gambled through the casino. That's really all I'm aware of.
I'll show you a video from the 29th of August 2017, and Commissioner, this is just to be shown to yourself and the witness. It's PCRC 0019 0001 0002. And could I ask if the associate could make sure the Zoom is off? Just tell me when it starts to play on your screen. Thank you, Mr. Burley.
Started now.
Is that the Pearl Room reception desk?
Yes, it is.
And a person approached there? carrying a white bag,
Yes, they did. Yep.
and they're now walking behind the reception desk down past the electronic gaming machine area.
That is correct.
And is the person then approaching the Pearl Room reception cage, the Pearl Room cage?
Yes, that's correct.
You can see the camera looking from the cage out towards the person behind who's approached the cage. He's handed over the white bag.
Yes, I can see that.
Does that look like a Crown Rewards card that he's handed over with the white bag?
Yes, it does.
And the contents of the bag are now being counted in the cash counting machine. And then the cash is laid out for the patron to see on the cage desk.
Yes.
Thank you. Have you seen that video before, Mr. Burling?
No, I haven't.
And do you recognise the patron?
No, I'm under the impression it's patron AE.
Do you know anything about what occurred in that video on the 29th of August 2017?
No, I don't.
Patron AE approached the cage in the Pearl Room with $145,000 in that paper bag. You weren't aware of that?
Subsequently, I was aware that there was some large transactions, yes.
When you say subsequently, how long after the 29th of August?
I'm not sure.
Sometime in that year or?
I don't know. I don't know.
And for what purpose were you told information about what happened?
Through conversation with my general manager.
That's Mr. Lee.
Correct.
And what was the purpose of that conversation? Why was Mr. Lee telling you this?
From recollection, I believe I had been away. I was, from memory, I was pretty unwell.
And did Mr. Lee task you with anything arising from that conversation?
No.
Did Mr. Lee tell you what was being done about this particular transaction?
My understanding was liaison with Waypol.
And who was doing that liaison?
I don't know.
And do you know what the purpose of liaising with Waypol was?
I can only make an assumption, I guess.
Well, don't do that.
Mr. Lee didn't tell you what the purpose of liaising with law enforcement was?
I'm not sure if it was him who actually liaised directly with law enforcement.
And apart from liaising with law enforcement, were you aware of any other process within Crown internally that occurred as a result of what we've seen on the video from the 29th of August 2017?
No. I had no involvement with this.
I accept that you had no involvement with this particular incident, but in terms of your general experience in the role that you perform at Crown, what would be the usual outcome from an incident like that occurring internally within Crown? Or would there be nothing would occur?
There would be a review undertaken to ascertain if the transaction was done appropriately within the SOPs, and if there wasn't, I would presume there'd be some form of HR meeting. There would be policies and processes may be reviewed and necessary tightening up in certain areas. Not knowing all the facts makes it difficult for me.
And who would do the review of the policies and processes?
If it relates to gaming, then gaming would look at their own reviews. If it was cage and count, then they would look at their processes there. There may be oversight from another manager from another department or the executive, I'm not sure.
An HR meeting, is that what you said?
It's a possibility if there was breaches identified.
And apart from identifying any gaming policy or procedure breaches, would there be any assessment of the patron from Crown's point of view?
There would be possibly a source of wealth or funds undertaken to ascertain the background of the patron, his capabilities, maybe.
And who would undertake that?
I really don't know.
Well, if someone presented at the Pearl Room Cage last night with $145,000 in cash,
Yes.
would there be any investigation of the patron undertaken within Crown? Any review or any type of interrogation of the patron?
The patron would be spoken to and asked to complete a source of funds form.
And would that occur at the cage?
If that's where the action, transaction was taking place, absolutely. There'd be a gaming manager involved and the cage manager involved in that. If the person refused or didn't wish to assist, then they'd be asked to leave the premises and then a ban would be put in place.
And in 2017, was there a process that involved the patron filling out a source of funds form?
I don't know.
So why don't you know that?
I'm sorry?
Why don't you know?
I'm not involved in that side of the process. I am aware of the processes currently, Commissioner.
Thank you.
Thank you. I want to show you another video from about just over a week later, so the 8th of September 2017. It's PCRC 0019 0001 0003, and if similarly this video could just be shown to the Commissioner and the witness. Thank you, Associate. If you wouldn't mind telling me when it's playing on the screen, thank you.
Absolutely. Yes, it's just commenced now.
A person's walking in to the Pearl Room reception area holding a box.
Yes, that's correct.
And the person with the box then moves past the reception area into the electronic gaming suite area of the Pearl Room and walks down the hall.
Yes.
Heading towards the cage in the Pearl Room.
That's correct.
Person approaches the cage desk and puts the box on top of the desk.
Yes.
And we see the aerial shot of the box being placed on the desk, and again, is that a Crown Rewards card?
Yes, that appears to be so. That's correct.
And what appears to be in the box?
Cash.
Would it be unusual for the cage in the Pearl Room to receive such a large amount of cash?
I don't know.
You don't know?
Back then, I'm not sure.
And then the cash is being laid out after counting on the Pearl Room cage desk area
Yes, that's
for
correct.
the patron to see.
Yes.
It seems to be the end of that clip.
Thank you, Commissioner. Have you seen that video before?
No, I haven't.
Are you aware of patron AE bringing $200,000 worth of cash in that box to the cage on that date,
No.
the 8th of September 2017?
No, I'm not.
If a patron had brought that amount of cash to Crown Perth over 2 separate evenings in over a short period of time, would that trigger an investigation into that patron by any internal department within Crown?
I would believe so.
If I could show Mr Burling CRW 70801746669, and this is subject to a non-publication order.
So whose screens is it to go on?
It can go on council screens.
Just not the public screens.
Correct, thank you, Commissioner. We go to the next page, thank you. You see under the heading for 8, patrons for review from previous meetings, and patron AE is the last dot point.
Yes, I can see that.
And it says findings to be compiled and added to risk register. JP is comfortable with ECDD that has been carried out. And this is from the 13th of October 2017, this particular note. Can you
Yes.
tell me what ECDD is?
Employee customer due diligence.
And that's the process that you've referred to before, involving your team? They do Google searches and look at a patron's gaming history?
I think there'll be a number of searches conducted at that level, yes.
Would that be, is an ECDD something that your team would have done in 2017?
My team in relation to patron AE, do you mean?
Or generally? Is that a task that would be undertaken by, or not necessarily your team, say anyone within security and surveillance investigations?
Yeah, absolutely, yes, yes.
Do you have any recollection of being involved or any of your direct reports being involved in patron AE's ECDD in October 2017?
No.
Thank you, that can be taken down.
So why would that be, Mr. Burley?
I'm sorry?
Why would it be that you have no recollection of that?
No, I was not involved in this particular matter, Commissioner.
Can I just add to that? It doesn't appear as though Mr. Burling was an attendee at that meeting, according to the list of attendees. And just while I'm on my feet, can I just bring this matter to your attention, Commissioner? This particular patron and these incidents that my friend is currently asking questions about has already been the subject of evidence by Mr. Lee. I can't disclose it because of restrictions and undertakings that I've given, but Commissioner, if you have signed the AUSTRAC undertaking, can I direct your attention to paragraph 217 of Mr. Lee's statement? That's document CRW.998.002.0559, which sets out at some length what was in fact done in relation to this patron. This should be the redacted version. Paragraph 217, I assume, is redacted on this version if it's going to be displayed publicly, but I don't mean to interrupt my friend on further questioning, but the matters addressed in 217 are particularly significant in relation to this particular issue and this patron.
Well, just let me have a look at that. It might just take me a moment to...
In particular, can I just direct your attention, Commissioner, to paragraph or subparagraph F of 217?
Copy I'm looking at might be a redacted copy as well. Yes, it is.
I should also just remind you, Commissioner, that Mr. Burling has already given evidence that he was absent when these issues first arose, which is probably why Mr. Lee is dealing with it.
Or perhaps we'll let him give that evidence, Mr. Harris. Sorry, was the document reference for Mr. Lee's statement 6580 or 0580? I can't read my own writing.
At the first page, it ends with 0559 version that I have. CRW.998.002.0559.
Sorry, 0559.
Yes.
Could you just repeat that number again, just make sure I've got it right?
CRW.998.002.0559. Is that the correct code?
It's a redacted version too, I'm afraid. At this point, I can't check that, Mr. Garros, because I just don't have access to an unredacted version.
I do have my own copy, only electronically on my computer.
Look, I think we'll just try and finesse it for the time being, Mr. Garros. So, first of all, I'll make if there isn't one already in existence, I'll make a non-publication order in respect of anything said today about AUSTRAC or AUSTRAC reporting, just because you made reference to it, Mr. Garros, and otherwise I'll retract that last question I asked, Mr. Burling. Can you just tell me, however, when you were on leave in 2017?
I'm not sure, ma'am. I was quite sick at some stage around there.
Right.
I can.
In the latter half of the year?
I believe so, yes. I can find those dates out.
Really what I was getting at is, given that you say at 18D of your statement that your team is responsible for investigations into matters of criminality and other matters initiated by Crown's legal team, and other matters you've referred to there. I was just wondering why it would be that your team would not be involved in any investigation involving a customer bringing unexplained source of funds plus large amounts of cash into the casino.
That could be a decision made well and truly higher than myself or Mr. Lee, and it may be investigated elsewhere.
Right, all right, thank you. Yes, Ms Nelson.
Thank you, Commissioner. While we've got paragraph 18 on the screen, could I have a sub-paragraph B? And earlier this morning you said that external stakeholder relationships were essentially law enforcement agencies that you liaised with and your team liaised with.
Correct.
Can I just ask you about how you go about doing that? Do you meet with law enforcement person to person, or do you engage with them by email, or how do you actually go about doing that?
Yeah, there can be email correspondence, telephone calls, may meet up for coffee, have a chat.
And do you do that on a regular basis, or do you do it as needed?
As needed. In relation to some matters, there are frequent meetings. Maybe I might get invited to a security meeting with the security team, the head of security, in relation to events coming up. In relation to my particular team dealing with investigations, I even may go to the police station itself.
Is there any constraint placed upon you by Crown in terms of how much information you can disclose to law enforcement when you meet with them in these meetings?
Well, nothing that I've been advised.
Is there a database for recording any law enforcement meetings that you have or any exchange of information with them?
That would be on iTrack ordinarily. If they're after CCTV footage, they would that would come in with an OTP, or there'd be an RFI which would be logged. That information would go into an iTrack incident and be recorded, absolutely.
So it'd be recorded on iTrack if there's been a formal request by law enforcement through a subpoena or a notice to produce process.
Correct, absolutely.
If there's been an informal approach, you've described sometimes meeting for coffee or email exchange, is there any database to record those conversations and what's discussed in them?
No.
Do you make a note on iTrack or any other system about the content of those conversations?
Not ordinarily, no.
Would there be any note that in fact that you have met with someone from law enforcement? The mere fact that you've had a meeting, would that be recorded anywhere?
Maybe a meeting request on the calendar, possibly. Apart from that, probably not.
Is there ever a situation where you might meet with law enforcement and they make a request for Crown Perth to keep engaging with a particular patron while law enforcement undertakes an investigation?
That has happened.
How often has that happened?
Infrequently.
Less than 10 times or?
I'm not sure on numbers. It's been a number of years I've been involved with the LEAs.
And on the infrequent occasions where that has happened, has the request been made formally by letter from law enforcement to Crown?
Not that I've received any letters, no.
So is it the situation that that request would be made informally to you at an informal coffee meeting, for example?
I think it's circumstance dependent on what they're after.
Would you agree that if there was a situation where law enforcement requested Crown not to take any action on a patron so they could continue their investigation, would you agree there's no obligation on Crown to continue to provide any service to a patron?
Yeah, I would agree with that.
And would you agree that it's up to Crown to make that decision based on Crown's own internal controls and risks?
It's a fair assumption, yes. Yes.
I want to ask you about your involvement in the Person of Interest subcommittee.
Yes.
And you mentioned that in paragraph 42 of your statement. Which is at page 8. And you've been an active member since 2012, so for about 9 years.
About that, that's correct.
And how often does the subcommittee meet?
Currently we meet fortnightly.
Is that more regular or less frequently than previously?
It has been a little bit fluid over the years, but ordinarily we've tried to do it fortnightly.
Now you say paragraph 45 that a a person might come to the notice of the person of interest subcommittee for many reasons, not just because of AML CTF issues. So I gathered that an AML reason is one reason that someone could be elevated to the person of interest subcommittee. Is that correct?
Yes, that's correct.
And what are the other reasons that they might come to interest of the committee?
There may be a bolo from WAPOL, from police, in relation to somebody they're looking for. Anybody who can assist. Obviously the community is what we're looking at here, is a community benefit as well, and also protecting the business. Our patrons are very important to us, so we don't want the wrong people on our premises. It could be in relation to somebody who's caused a significant amount of damage to property. And I believe the more people that are aware of who we're looking for, the better in that regard.
So generally a person would only come to notice of the committee if there was some adverse behaviour or activity undertaken by that person around the casino.
More than likely.
So they don't come to interest of the committee if they've done something positive, behaviour-wise. You're correct. Yeah. So what's the overall purpose of the person of interest subcommittee?
To maybe information given to my team from AML in relation to maybe associates of persons that have come to the AML notice and vice versa. So, as I say, we can protect the business, we can protect our patrons, and if we can do a community service at the same time, that's a real big benefit. So,
in essence, is the committee considering whether Crown Perth should continue to do business with that patron?
Not at that level, but we look at some of those aspects, absolutely.
Apart from considering whether Crown should have an ongoing relationship with that person, what other reason would that committee be considering a person's adverse behaviour?
There could be media issues that have cropped up, and we're discussing that, and do we escalate the matter to the main POI committee at the direction of the chair? It may be there's something there that we need to advise people that we are actually banning a particular patron who is a gamer, and just letting people know that this person will be banned for some other criminal activity potentially.
So if you're not going to continue to have a relationship with a patron, then effectively Crown needs to ban them from the premises, don't they?
If that relationship is, I mean, they could be purely a hotel stayer or a gamer. They're not everybody that comes there comes to the casino. We have a lot of families and people that come there for the enjoyment of the hotels and restaurants. So it's not just all around gaming.
If you said in the previous answer that one of the issues that the committee might consider are media issues, do you mean possible reputational damage to Crown? Is that what you mean by media issues?
No, it could be the person may be involved with somebody else in relation to some criminal activity, is what I was getting at.
And why would you be considering that person's associations? For the purpose of possibly excluding them from the property?
With the potential, absolutely.
And for what other purpose?
No, the potential is to exclude them from the property, for sure. Yeah.
In paragraph 47 of your statement, you describe a tool to help the assessment process, and you call it a PDA tool, a POI decision assessment form. I won't show you a copy of the form that's at CRW 701 0058 647 because it's a matter of a non-publication order, but can you explain how that form works in practice? Who fills it out, and then how does it come to the attention of the committee?
A scenario could be that we have a person of interest that has come to our attention, and my team might be concerned about that. I would request one of my team to complete the form with all the details that we have on there, which may include criminal association, it may have criminal antecedents, there may be some media adverse publicity there, could be an association with some other PO or person of interest, and then that PDA tool will be forwarded through to the POI committee for their assessment.
And the information that is filled out on the form, does it include risk factors or risk assessments?
I'd have to refresh my memory on the form, I'm sorry.
How often do you fill out one of the forms?
Very, very infrequently.
Normally it's a member of your team?
Yeah.
You could have paragraph 50 of your statement, thank you. So further to this, you talked about the completed form being escalated to the committee and dependent upon information provided. Are you referring just to information that's in the form, or does the committee get information from other sources other than the form?
No, we obtain information from wherever we can get it, basically, through the channels I've mentioned previously. And it may be based on this paragraph here that the decision is made at that time to exclude prior to a PDA tool being submitted.
And of all the people who are on the subcommittee,
Yes.
who would provide the committee members with the information that's in addition to what's on the tool?
Probably myself or one of my investigators.
And the chair of the subcommittee, who's Mr. Lee, might exclude the person at that stage, might they?
Yes,
Might he,
that's correct, Mr. Lee.
Thank you, that can be taken down. Just want to ask you some general questions about Crown's attitude to know your customer and the enhanced customer due diligence, which is the ECDD process we referred to earlier. What do you understand to mean by the phrase probity process? If you were asked, or your team were asked to undertake a probity process?
We don't get asked to do that directly.
So you don't understand, you don't have a knowledge of what that would involve?
Oh, it's looking into someone's background.
Okay. So who would undertake those type of investigations at Crown?
If it comes down to financial, that wouldn't be my team at all.
Which team would that be?
I'm not sure. On the financial side of things, I don't know.
So the surveillance and security investigation team that you lead don't get involved in any probity investigations?
We do background checks, absolutely, through different systems that we have within Crown. There may be cause for us to liaise with Crown Melbourne as well, as part of our checks there.
Who do you liaise with at Crown Melbourne? Which department, firstly?
Probably just the security department there.
Is that something that you do personally? Or
I have a good relationship with my counterpart in Melbourne, absolutely.
And once a patron starts coming to Crown, does Crown Perth undertake any ongoing assessment of financial background or probity at all, to your knowledge?
I'm not sure.
If during your meetings with law enforcement you became aware of some adverse information about a Crown patron, what would you do with that information?
Depending on the nature of it, I would more than likely escalate that through to my general manager, and then I'm sure from there it would be escalated further. Absolutely. Absolutely. No hesitation.
So by escalating it to your general manager, you'd tell Mr. Brian Lee that you'd received some information from law enforcement about a patron?
In most circumstances, absolutely.
But would your team then be tasked with doing any investigation to assist anyone to make any decisions about that patron?
I would initiate that to get further information, more clarification, so we had a full picture.
And when you say you have a good relationship with your counterpart in Crown Melbourne, has that always been the case?
Certainly for a number of years, absolutely, probably 5 or 6, 7 years, yeah.
And how often would you talk to that person?
Ad hoc, it's not a meeting weekly or anything of that nature. As and when matters do arise. Just recently I was on the phone to the gentleman 3 times in 3 days over specific matters, but I may not have spoken to him for a couple of weeks prior to that. So.
And if Crown Melbourne had some information of an adverse nature about one of their patrons who they knew was also a patron in Crown Perth, would you expect your counterpart over there to inform you of that?
Absolutely.
And has that happened in the past?
Absolutely.
Do you recall a patron by the name of Mr. Simon Pan?
I again know the name, yes.
And what do you know about Mr. Pan?
Mr. Pan entered into the Pearl Room when he was banned.
Do you mind just keeping your voice
Oh,
up?
yes, sure.
Mr. Bell?
When he was excluded.
And the Pearl Room at Crown Perth?
Correct.
And when did that occur?
I'm not sure on the actual date. I think it was around January of this year, maybe. I'm thinking.
Have you or your team been tasked with doing any investigation to ascertain how that came to be?
I was involved in a meeting. I was requested to attend a meeting to answer some questions.
Who was at the meeting?
Mr. Bossy, IT, someone from gaming manager, myself, I'm not sure who else.
If a patron was banned in Crown Melbourne, like Mr. Pan was,
Yes,
and Crown Melbourne made that known to Crown Perth
yes.
at the time, isn't it ordinarily a responsibility of your department to make sure that the patron is banned from the Crown Perth premises?
Yes, that's correct.
And can you tell the Commissioner why it was that Mr. Pan was able to be allowed into the Pearl Room on those 20-odd occasions over December 2020, January 2021, despite being banned in Melbourne?
My only understanding of that was The ban was actually put in place by my team on or about the 19th, I believe, or 20th of June, I think 2020. The process was conducted appropriately by my team. The ITRAC ban was put in place, the psycho stop codes were put on, and the Louis exclusion was put on. It appeared from review that there was an issue with the gaming system through an IT issue, where certain people could see more accounts than others. There was multiple accounts, and I believe there was a slip through the crack, that the accounts that my team could see were not actually all the accounts that were available to be seen. And therefore the stop codes weren't viewed.
So effectively, a stop code was only placed on one of Mr. Pan's psycho accounts.
No,
Is that
there
the
was,
situation?
for example, I could see 5 accounts. My investigator, I believe, could see 4. This was after the review, not at the time, which caused us some concern, and I believe IT could see a number more than I could. This has all been resolved.
So these are accounts on the psycho system.
That's correct.
So the accesses between you and your team were different to
Correct.
the psycho
Yeah.
system.
And between my team and gaming and the hosts, there was a number of issues in relation to that.
Do you know what a psycho alert monitoring process is?
Not come across the term directly. It may be similar to a patron watch. I'm not sure.
Now, I know you didn't attend any AML Perth committee meetings for patron AE, but has it been your practice to attend some of those AML committee meetings in the past?
No.
Do you have any awareness of individual AML risk ratings that are applied to particular patrons?
Not directly, no.
Well, do you have an awareness of what the difference is in practical terms between a high risk rating or a significant risk rating?
No.
I want to ask you about loan sharking. What do you understand that term to mean?
Somebody providing somebody else with money at some degree of interest on repayment that is not recorded lawfully as per maybe a bank. It's an individual lending money to somebody else at exorbitant interest rates and then requesting the money back.
So at what stage does that patron behaviour involving loaning of money become unacceptable to Crown from a patron behaviour point of view?
I'm not
What
sure.
do you, if a surveillance operative saw someone a patron who they thought was loaning money,
Yes.
at what stage of the behaviour that's being observed does Crown deem it to be unacceptable and the patron comes to notice?
I guess if there's some other sort of evidence to confirm that it is loan sharking as opposed to lending money.
So what type of evidence would the surveillance operative be looking for?
Maybe if the person has a book and they're writing something in there that may correlate to giving the money out and making some form of record of that. Maybe if another person or a staff member has observed something or overheard something, maybe.
And how many times in your experience of doing your job and investigations at Crown, how many times does that type of observation need to be made in relation to a particular patron before Crown would take steps to ban the patron?
I don't think there's a particular number that's laid out to suggest that it's once, twice or 10 times. I think it's all down to circumstance and potentially an interview with the person concerned to ascertain what is going on.
Have you ever undertaken such interviews?
No.
Who would do that?
I don't know. I haven't. It's possible that a gaming manager might, if they see something that's not quite right.
Have you known of any patrons of Crown Perth to be interviewed about possible loan sharking allegations?
No.
Just looking at the paper in front of you, at the patron pseudonyms, I wanted to ask you about patron S. And from the iTrack information that the Royal Commission has, between 2009 and 2020, patron S had 26 notifications on iTrack for suspected loan sharking. And of those, 24 were notifications that were from between 2013 and 2020. Are you aware of patron S's behaviour in these particular allegations?
I'm aware of the name. I'm aware of the incidents that are listed on there. In relation to a number of those incidents too, if the narratives are read, it actually says the incident is loan sharking, but there's no untoward behaviour noted.
So would your team, your CIT investigation team, have been tasked with looking into those iTrack notifications?
Not necessarily.
So the iTrack notifications themselves, do you get access to those soon after they've been made?
Once an incident is created, it's stored there, then I will review what's come through probably within the 24 hours to see what incidents have been created. In relation to a number of these matters prior to the formulation of CIT, they have probably gone to surveillance for review, and myself was probably not advised of that. So from 2018 onwards, my analyst would have been notified, and so would I, definitely. Does that clarify that?
So, and you would have been notified within 24 hours? So.
I don't get notified, I review.
Right, you would have reviewed...
I don't get a notification.
Okay,
no.
so you would have reviewed the individual notification on iTrack within 24 hours of it occurring?
Potentially, yes. Obviously weekends and maybe days off, that sort of thing would come into play.
And so you would have seen those for patron S that had occurred between 2018 and 2020?
I would have had the opportunity to, absolutely.
And having seen those, did you go back into the holdings, the iTrack holdings in relation to Patroness to see what historically had occurred?
I don't recall off the top of my head. If I did, I am aware of the number of incidents attached to that Patroness.
Or having been aware of the number of incidents that attracted to her, what did you see as your responsibility to do in relation to Patroness?
The matter was being dealt with by other persons, not me.
Who was the matter being dealt with?
I don't know, not myself. That's all I can tell you. I don't know.
Were you ever asked to provide information to any other committee or senior management of Crown in relation to Patroness?
Not that I recall, no.
Did you ever have a discussion with Patroness about the behaviour?
I didn't, no.
Did you have a discussion with law enforcement about Patroness's behaviour?
Not that I recall, no.
Are you aware that Patroness was excluded from Crown Perth in 2020?
I'm aware that Patroness is excluded. I wasn't sure on the date.
Were you involved in that exclusion through the POI subcommittee, that exclusion consideration?
I'm not sure if that would have gone through the subcommittee or that was a decision made outside of that. I don't know.
What was the attitude of Crown Perth to prostitution and soliciting occurring on the premises?
Prosecution for what, sorry?
Sorry, prostitution and soliciting.
If we can identify it, we stop it and we move people on and we will exclude people.
There's a zero tolerance policy.
Absolutely.
Have you ever known of any Crown Perth employees to arrange for sexual services for patrons?
Not directly, no.
And indirectly?
I've heard anecdotally. I've had no evidence of that personally.
Never been asked to do any internal investigation into such employees' behaviour?
Not a formal one, no.
What do you mean not a formal one?
Where there was no written report.
So you were asked to do an investigation but not provide a written report?
No,
Is that your evidence?
no. I did not provide a written report. I was asked to look at certain aspects of a employee's behaviour.
And did you report to a particular person what your findings were?
I did, and they were around the use of a complimentary card, and around, if we're talking about the same employee here, around the use of a comp card and a company corporate card.
And how long ago was this?
I think around 2016.
But there was no written report produced by you?
There was no need for that. It was the documentary evidence in itself explained what I was looking at.
Thank you. Commissioner, I've probably got another 10 minutes of questions before I finish.
Yes. How long do you think you'll be, Mr. Garros?
I presently don't have any questions to ask, so I'm content to...
I think I might be 10 minutes, so we're looking at possibly up till 1:30. Are you in a position to continue, or would you like a short break now, Mr. Burling?
No, I'm fine, Commissioner.
All right, is everyone ready? Just, all right, we'll continue. Thank
Thank
you.
you, Commissioner Sayers. And did that informal investigation that you've referred to around the use of a complimentary card, did that involve Crown employees arranging for sexual services to Pearl Room patrons?
There was no evidence of that was supported on that card, no.
Had your investigation involved those allegations?
My investigation was required to look at what the card was used for and to whom complimentaries were provided.
And were some of those complimentaries alleged to be sexual services?
No.
So is your evidence then that you've never conducted an investigation you've never been asked to conduct an investigation in relation to sexual services being provided free of charge to patrons?
By an employee?
Yes.
No.
We could have your statement back on the screen, thank you. CRW 998-002-0786. And turning to paragraph 77. And under the heading of corporate culture and staffing, in paragraph 77, you mentioned revenue and profits, you say are vitally important to Crown Perth. But in your opinion, Crown Perth does not put revenue and profits above staff. You see, you said that?
Absolutely, but I believe there's a major part of that statement that's missed out. I may bring that up.
Certainly.
And that is, it's vitally important to Crown Perth as they are to any business. And I think that is true with any business that you're looking at profits and revenue, absolutely. But it does not put revenue or profits above the safety of staff, and I'll stick by that. That's my opinion.
Thank you for that clarification. In the last sentence of that paragraph, you say, my impression of staff satisfaction is that it's at one of the highest levels I've seen throughout my working career, having worked for many different corporations and government entities.
Correct.
And you stand by that evidence?
Absolutely.
Have you been aware that Deloitte has recently been tasked with surveying and reporting on particular aspects of the organisational culture at Crown?
No.
You weren't interviewed or surveyed?
No. I believe there was a cultural survey. I didn't have the opportunity to enter into it. I'm not sure if that was Deloitte's. Sure.
Have you been privy to the final report from Deloitte's delivered on the 30th of July 2021?
No.
If we could look at CRW 701 006 3776. And this is a document which shows the Deloitte survey results in detail by geographic location, and it's dated September 2021. And if we could go to page 2, which is 3797, sorry, 22, page 22. You can see across the top it has the various business units in Perth, starting with Cage and Count on the left and finishing with property services.
Yes, I see that.
And the fifth column from the left is security and the sixth column is surveillance.
Yes.
And then tracking down the column for security first, in relation to the question 8, the people I work with take responsibility for their actions. can you see in the security area, only 49% of those people surveyed agreed with that statement?
Yes, I see that.
And in surveillance, only 48% agreed with that statement.
Yes.
Does that surprise you?
I think it's concerning.
But is it a surprise that that's the result?
Absolutely.
And we go down to number 13. The people I work with bend the rules when it suits them. And in security, 36% agree with that statement. And in surveillance, 43% agree with that statement. Is that a matter of concern to you?
Absolutely.
And then number 15, there are often instances when working around our policies, processes or procedures is necessary to get the job done. In security, 27% agree with that. And in surveillance, 62% agree with that statement. You're nodding your head, Mr. Burling, is that?
Oh, no, I'm just agreeing with the figures that are in front of me. Yeah.
Is that a surprise to you?
Having not seen it, that's people's opinions, that's their perceptions. So, yes, it's surprising to me.
Would you expect Mr. Lee to have a conversation with you about these findings at some point?
I'm sure we will discuss these at some stage.
Are you able to explain why staff feel the way that they've expressed in this survey?
Well, I don't know.
I don't know if I can answer
Okay, I
that.
withdraw that question. Perhaps getting a bit late. Thank you. They were my questions. Thank you, Commissioner.
Thank you, Ms Nelson. So, Mr Garros.
Commissioner, I have no questions, but I have been given a copy of Mr Lee's statement. It's actually an amended version which picks up the corrections he apparently made in the witness box, but it hasn't been produced to the Commission yet. But it does have the relevant paragraph unredacted if you would like a copy.
Yes, look, if you could hand it up and I'll have a look at it, and then I might hand it back to you
Yes.
so that it can be dealt with in a formal way in terms of lodging it with the Commission.
So page 22 at the bottom right-hand corner and paragraph 217.
Thank you for that, Mr Garros. That can be returned to him. Mr Burling, is there a document which prescribes your team's role and responsibilities?
No.
So you've set them out at paragraph 18 of your statement. How do you know, this might sound a bit of a silly question, but how do you know that they are your team's roles and responsibilities?
Through discussion with my general manager as to what we're supposed to do moving forward.
And that's Mr Lee.
Correct.
Are you and your team physically stationed at Perth Casino?
Yes.
Is there a written policy relating to the provision by you and other Perth Casino staff of information to external stakeholders?
There is an SOP in relation to LEA interaction where it requires the conduit to come through my team to keep it singular, I guess, to make it easier for law enforcement and us to keep an understanding rather than everywhere around the business. But there's probably nothing in the manner of what you're asking directly.
And do I understand from what you said to Ms Nelson that requests from LEAs for, say, surveillance material held by Crown could come in formally through a notice to produce or a written request, but it also could come informally, orally to you?
Ordinarily, if it's CCTV footage, it would come in through a formal request with an order to produce attached to an email. That is the normal process. If police are asking informally of CCTV footage of a particular person of interest, we are happy to opt to find that footage, and then we'll say you now need the order to produce for us to release that.
So do you ever provide such material without a formal written request at the very least?
No.
If you want to obtain surveillance footage of an incident that is not already in iTrack,
If I do,
yes, if you do, you receive some request from an LEA or you're
Yep.
investigating some other matter and you want to obtain such footage, how do you do that?
I contact my investigators in surveillance, ask them to backtrack, do the review, create an incident, put the footage into the incident, and if the LEAs require it, they submit the necessary paperwork.
So you request one of your officers who's in surveillance to obtain the footage.
Yes.
They then send it to you.
No, it gets dubbed into the iTrack incident, so I have access to that.
iTrack.
Yeah.
And in terms of their conduct, do they have to obtain authority from the head of surveillance to action your request, or is your authority sufficient for them to do that?
No, my authority is sufficient for that. There is a form that is signed by the surveillance operations manager for the release of that footage when police attend, which is also countersigned by the surveillance or head of surveillance at that time.
Thank you. Whilst you've been at Perth Casino, and particularly in the time 2012 to 14, so quite early on, quite a while ago, were you aware of complaints made by staff about the behaviour of participants or representatives of what might be known as the Lau Junket or the Sun City Junket?
No.
So you're not aware that there was complaints that they had large amounts of cash in the casino which they left in their salons?
No.
No. Or you're not aware of complaints that they appeared to be gambling on instructions they received over the phone rather than gambling on their own account?
No.
And so you've never heard of such behaviour by any, in relation to any junket players?
No.
No.
Commissioner.
Have you ever investigated an alleged assault on an employee by a patron?
Absolutely.
And are you thinking of one particular incident or more than one?
I was just trying to not pull a name, but there's been a number of indecent assaults where patrons have assaulted staff.
And that would be within your area of investigation or not?
Yes, absolutely.
And if such an investigation is carried out and the conduct is, in your view, found to have occurred,
Yes.
what then occurs in respect of that patron?
Obviously, after interviewing the employee, unless police have been called on that night, if I'm looking at it after the fact, I will interview the employee, obtain a statement, obviously the CCTV footage, which there ordinarily would be, the patron's details, and the matter will be sent to police for prosecution. And from there, the patron will be excluded.
And in any of the occasions on which you are thinking of, did the staff member not want to make a complaint to the police?
Sometimes that does occur.
So in that circumstance, what then is the process?
The patron will be excluded.
And you've talked about the patron will be excluded.
Correct.
In your view, is that does that happen always, or has it happened always in the ones you've been involved in?
Yes, it has, ma'am.
And would that be, how long would that exclusion be for?
In a circumstance like that, I would ensure that the ban that I asked my team to issue and have served is permanent, and there would be a potential revocation review after a period of 2 years.
And can you think of any such circumstance where the ban has not been permanent?
Under those circumstances? Yes. No.
In respect of the Person of Interest Subcommittee, again, looking at its role, does it have a charter or specific delegations from the main Person of Interest Committee?
There is a document outlining the charter, yes.
Right.
Yeah.
All right. So its role is in writing.
Yes, it
in
is.
That charter.
Yes.
Lastly, in respect of Mr. Pan, you referred to the distinction between you and your team being able to identify 4 or 5 accounts. Were these patron accounts?
Yes, they were.
So how was it that Mr. Pan had up to 5 patron accounts?
With Mr. Pan's full name, the names can be juggled, unfortunately, and that causes some confusion with the system.
And
if that explains that, yeah.
My understanding is that Crown has been trying to find ways to avoid patrons having more than one account.
Absolutely.
And so he's an example of at least the older systems not preventing that from occurring.
I believe it's sorted now, which will reduce the potential for this to occur moving forward to, I'm hoping, nil.
And in respect of him gaining entry, was this also a time prior to facial recognition being used at the casino, or was it being used?
I believe FRT was in use. Where the cameras were placed, I'm not sure. I'm not involved in that side of things.
But whatever the situation, he managed to get in without being detected.
Yes, that's correct.
I said that was the last matter, but I'd forgotten that I had made some marginal notes here, so let me review those. Just wanted to understand what the distinction was between the surveillance officers who are part of your team and other surveillance officers. Do you just have one surveillance officer seconded to you?
No, I have two positions in surveillance. One is the Surveillance Investigations and Compliance Officer, which is the equivalent of the security side, and a Surveillance Investigations Analyst, who primarily deals with reviews on AML and gaming matters for gaming errors and procedure problems. The Compliance Officer deals primarily with looking at the audits for our EBI and access controls, etc., as well as some ITRAC matters, as well as conducting investigations that may come through from LEAs that we're looking at potential POIs. They are separate from the operators who do the day-to-day operations, monitoring and surveillance activities, totally away from that.
So I understand from your evidence that you obviously have the power to direct your team and the members in it,
Yes.
but you don't have any power to direct other surveillance and security officers?
I probably could do, but I don't, because they have their own managers, and I think as a matter of protocol I go to their manager and discuss anything with them, and then that's where the direction would come from if there was something there.
I noticed that in respect of the Person of Interest Subcommittee, there doesn't seem to be a member of RG on it. Am I right in that respect, or did I miss a name?
No, that's correct.
Is there any reason why that is?
That's just how the subcommittees has always been set up.
That does conclude my questions, Mr. Burling. Is there anything arising?
No, thank you, Commissioner.
Thank you, Commissioner.
Mr. Burling, that concludes your evidence this afternoon. We will leave the summons in place in case there are some follow-up questions, but you are certainly free to go about your business. Thank you very much for your attendance.
Thank you very much.
Thank you, and we will adjourn until 2 p.m. All rise.